In the late 1990s, I was teaching in the Department of Middle Eastern History at Haifa University. The main assignment in that particular module was a request from students to research what occurred in 1948 in the places where they lived or where they were born into. There was one extraordinary student, older than me, one should say. His name was Teddy Katz, and he responded eagerly to the assignment, and he found out that his kibbutz, Kibbutz Magal, was founded on the ruins of the village Zeta. Katz was and remained in a way Zionist, naively believing that you could square the circle and advocate a liberal humanist version of Zionism, an absurd belief to my mind, in an enlightenment, as absurd as the idea of an enlightened colonialism. Part of what unfolded later has to do, I think, with this misguided perception of reality and explains his behavior later on. This is why, after finding out about Zeta, he tried also to invite the survivors of the 1948 destroyed village, living still inside the 1948 areas, to visit and maybe even talk to the settlers who overtook the village, but he was scorned and castigated by his fellow members of the kibbutz. Katz wished to continue with 1948 for his master thesis. And I suggested writing a microhistory of villages affected by the Nakba. He completed his thesis in 1998, and its title was The Exodus of the Arabs from the Village on the Slopes of the Carmel Mountain. The language he used for this thesis is important. Exodus and Arabs are part of a Zionist discourse to which Katz subscribed, and yet he was about to become, for a while, public enemy number one in the eyes of the Zionist academia and media. The thesis received the highest possible grade. In chapter 4 of the thesis, Katz told the story of Tantura. He did not know beforehand what he would find. Working on the other villages, he found enough documentation and oral testimonies to tell the story of the ethnic cleansing of these 5 villages. To his surprise, both Zionist soldiers and villagers from Tantura told him about the massacre that occurred in the village, both on the 22nd and the 23rd of May, 1948, while and after the village was occupied by the Israeli army. His surprise was mainly due to the fact that the major works already in existence at the time, such as Walid Khalidi's All That Remains and Benny Morris, The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem, did not mention the massacre. In fact, the massacre was already reported by Nimr al-Khatib in his memoirs Min Athar al-Nakba, published in Beirut in 1950, and were told by every now and then in meetings organized by the Committee for Internal Refugees inside Israel, who included some survivors of Tantura. And if you visited the only 2 villages that Israel allowed to remain on the coast between Tel Aviv and Haifa, 2 out of 40 villages, Jisr al-Zarqa and Faradis, you would have heard from people who lived there and were originally from Tantura about the massacre, but not in the 2 seminal works at that moment, in 2000, Walid al-Khalidi and Benny Morris's work. Then a newspaper inside Israel, Kul al-Arab, also carried interviews with survivors of the massacre before Teddy Katz wrote his thesis. But Katz's thesis was the first academic publication introducing the massacre. In the same year that Katz wrote his thesis, Mahmoud ibn Yahya published a book on Tantura in Damascus. He was from Tantura, as many refugees in the Yarmouk village, Yarmouk refugee camp were from Tantura, reporting a massacre pointing to 52 victims, including women who were slaughtered by the Israeli troops. Katz possessed tens more than 100 hours of interviews with Jews and Palestinians, which he recorded, who were involved in the occupation of Tantura, and relied also on a handful of documents from the Israeli military archive. On the basis of this material, he concluded that around 200 to 250 of the villagers were either shot in cold blood by the army or were murdered during a stampede of angry soldiers through the village in response to the deaths of 8 of their fellow soldiers in the initial attack on the village. The executions were on the beach and were graphically described by Jewish and Palestinian eyewitnesses and alluded to by the documents he found in the Israeli archives. The documents corroborated also the eyewitnesses' claim that 2 mass graves were excavated near the graveyard, that is the ordinary graveyard of the village, to accommodate the bodies. The graves today are covered by a parking lot. The mass graves are covered by a parking lot belonging to the settlement Nachsholim that was built on the ruins of Tantura. What was striking was how the evidence given by the troops complemented the one given by the survivors of Tantura. And thus this was historically a rare example where different perspectives fused into a complete picture of a past event. As mentioned, the thesis was written in 1998. 2 years later, a journalist who browsed through the University of Haifa's library found the thesis and published its finding on the massacre in a daily newspaper called Ma'ariv. The publication led to a libel suit by the veterans of the brigade, Alexandroni Brigade, whose soldiers perpetrated the massacre. When they found themselves in the public eye, the soldiers and leading historians at Haifa universities decided to act quickly to disqualify the student and his thesis. Under the pressure of their peers, those soldiers who had clearly been recorded by Katz confessing to their crimes in Tantura were persuaded to submit affidavits to the court denying their previous evidence. These veterans had very close ties with the university management. Their main advocates were the dean of the Faculty of Humanities and the head of the history school. And both these lecturers did not lose time in acting. They demanded from the student to give them the recording of the interviews. At the time, the student did not have to record, let alone share the recordings, and handed them over to the lawyers of the veterans. The tactics were clear. Now was the time to question the professionalism of the historian and not the massacre itself. From that moment onwards, either in the courtroom or in the various forums and committees, the University of Haifa appointed to examine the thesis, the question of the massacre was sidelined, and only one issue was examined: how many of the hours of tapes recorded were accurately or inaccurately transcribed by the student. Whether it was the prosecutor or the university members prosecuting Katz, they all dealt with the discrepancies they could find between the tapes and the interviews on them and the quotes in the thesis. There were some discrepancies, very few and insignificant as far as the massacre was concerned, but they were enough to declare the student as unprofessional. I will remind you that in the first round, Katz received the highest possible grade in the university. The few instances that found of the discrepancies were of blurred sentences in interviews with older Palestinian villagers, which were presented by the prosecutor and the university later as intended fabrications of the truth. Katz was presented with these inaccuracies on the first day in the court, and after a long day in court, he broke down. In the evening, at the office of the prosecutor, he wrote a letter of confession in which he stated that he fabricated the evidence of the massacre. It seems that the pressure of his family, his lawyers, and the university lawyers caused him to write this letter, which he retracted 12 hours later, regretting doing it in the first place. The judge refused to accept the retraction, imposed on him the prosecution's expenses, and demanded that he would publish a public apology. Katz refused, and this was taken to the Supreme Court that left the verdict of the regional court as it were. The university did all it could to disqualify Katz. The first step was to use the discrepancies found by the prosecutor as a pretext from demanding a new thesis. Katz was willing to rewrite a new thesis and corrected all the discrepancies and added new discriminating evidence about the massacre. But this was, of course, not what the university wanted. So with the help of 5 anonymous new referees, the new thesis, a very uncommon number of referees, by the way, for an MA thesis in any university, the new thesis was not passed by the majority of the referees, whose verdict was that the dissertation was poorly written. Interesting, on the 9th of February, 2022, that is, well, a few weeks ago, I don't know what the date is today, this month anyway, Professor Moshe Maoz from the Hebrew University wrote to Haaretz that he found nothing. First of all, he admitted that he was one of the anonymous examiners of the second thesis, and he stated that he found nothing that invalidated the argument about the massacre and gave actually the second version of the thesis a good grade. To his great surprise, his report was completely ignored by the university.
I'm of those ones that grew in Israel, and I spent my first 40 years while eating and swallowing. You see here, everything that I was given to swallow without having any questions, both by my parents, my teachers, and other people of the same age. The holy generation of 48. In 82, I was finishing being sent to Mexico to work in educating young Jews towards the mission to come to Israel to be some kind of Israeli citizens. In June 82, as probably part of you know, another war, another holy war. Always when we speak about wars of Israel, they all are very holy wars because of the chosen nations, you know. We are not just a nation. Jews are the chosen nation. So another war was to begin, the Lebanon War. We were invited by the Israeli ambassador in Mexico, a general, to inform us about this war, and he was very frustrated as a general that he was not invited to take part in this war, but he told us that they managed somehow. Even on my way back home through Europe, I was asking ambassadors whether they really indeed managed without me, such a hero, in this war, because I was very used that when there is war, I must be there in Israel. Only when I arrived home, I began to ask questions, what is this war about? And I was told that Palestinians, the bad ones, always Palestinians are bad, don't you forget, please. The Palestinians attacked Israeli diplomat named Argov in London and wounded him very hard. The Israeli reaction was by the Israeli Minister of Defense, the very Honorable George W. Sharon, that attacked Lebanon, conquered Lebanon, and even conquered Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. In history, 18 years is not very much. for people, for people's life, 18 years is this time 365 days every year. And this is the time, 18 years, while Lebanon was conquered. And we killed there and were killed, and butchered and were butchered. And then, one nice day, we just went out, nothing achieving, but one big zero, exactly like in all the other wars. Nothing good of a very cruel war that killed many, many human beings in both sides. And you must forgive me, because generally Israelis do not take Palestinians as just human beings. I'm a little bit extraordinary in this. I believe that Palestinians, exactly like me and like at least the most part of you that seem to me now, are just human beings. Every one of them have family, mothers, fathers, and so on. And to kill them is a catastrophe, exactly like it is a catastrophe when one of our holy brothers, the Jews, are killed. It's very special to say it, but this is. In those years, in the middle of the 80s, I decided that I am grown up enough already to begin studies in university. I began to study history of the nation of Israel and history of the Middle East. In the second year, I was suggested by the department to begin already the second title, and I did this. And in the end of the third year, when I almost finished hearing all of the courses, my elder daughter was killed in the army by an accident, and I had to stay a little bit away from the academical business. I'm telling it because later on, 8 years later, when I thought that maybe it's already possible to try to complete the master studies, I decided to make a micro-historical thesis. I thought that after 49 years, it's time already to get into details about the very forming war of Israel of ever, the war of 48. And another decision that I had, and I'm very sad and ashamed to tell you, that until then, nothing like this was done. And as far as I know, and you know that in academia, you never say 100%, you just say as far as I know. And as far as I know, so far, nothing like this is being done until this very moment. And I am saying this about personal stories, what we call in academia oral history, personal stories of the Jewish heroes, fighters of 48, and also, again, we are back, not to believe, to Palestinians. Also stories of Palestinians that people don't believe, but they were part of this war. Because always, since then until this very day, we are always making peace between one crazy part of the leading party in Israel with another less crazy part of the same party. This is kind of a peace we are making there. Another kind of a peace is something about peace between two parties, and so on. We already made peace with USA also, so there is no more peace with USA, but we never spoke with Palestinians seriously about peace, although we always make war against them. I look after Palestinians that remained in Palestine after the war, because not as I was told as a child, it didn't happen like all of the Palestinians escaped from Palestine in this war. This is what people told us, but this is not the truth. What happened was that those Palestinians that were not killed in that war just were pushed away from the country. In this war, which was very cruel and was a war of existence of both sides, Israel did not only win in this war. After winning, and I am repeating saying after winning and not while the war, Israel made everything possible to push away most of the Palestinians from the country. I just want to remind that this happened 3 years only after the Second World War finished, while there was done an ethnic cleansing to the Jews by others. In the first time that Israel was a state and officially could make decisions, one of the very first decisions was to make an ethnic cleansing to others, in this case the Palestinians. 553 villages were demolished. Most of those villages never fought against Israel. I don't know how many of you heard once that people without land are looking for a land without people. Here I put this map. Those who are very close maybe are able to see it. Others must believe me for the moment, and later on you're able to see. This map is full with not very much, only around 800 and something villages, Palestinian villages and cities, exactly of that empty land that people without land looked for. Professor Salman Abu Sita, the one who made this map, probably does not understand anything in geographic and in historic of this country. Otherwise, how comes that he certainly invent so many villages? When I looked after Palestinians that were left in the country, I asked people not very far from the area of Haifa, the city I was born, of people of 48 from villages like Kafren, Subaren, Sindiana, Shuf, Mazar, Tira, Tantura, Jabba, Ijzim, and Razal, Kufr Lam, Sarafan, etc. Many, more than 40 villages, all of them are no more existing. And by the way, I must give you that example of this exact area of the coastal area of between Haifa and at that time Tel Aviv, Yafo. In this area exactly, they were living at those times 64 villages. From these 64, only 2 remained after this war. Only 4 of all of those 64 fought against Israel, as far as we know. All the others didn't fight, and nevertheless, all of the people were pushed away, and all of the villages were destroyed. The other 2 remaining, Jisr Zarqa and Faradis, are 2 villages very close to 3 settlements of Israel that said that they want these people to be their workers. Another reason, which probably you won't find in any book, is that D. Ben-Gurion, the holy founder of Israel, that was Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, first of Israel, decided to take these two villages as a kind of example to tell everyone, well, you see that these two villages raised white flag in the first moment and we didn't touch them. And others fought against us, and what choice did we have? And this is, I'm very ashamed to say, a great, great lie. Most of all of the villages never fought, and nevertheless, they don't exist any longer. Very soon after I began to look after the Palestinians, I paid attention that whenever I mentioned the name of the village, Tantura, the reaction was not as always. And therefore, I decided to ask one of those old people of 48 what it is about, Shur Khurafiyya in Arabic. And the answer was Majjara Kbiri, which means big massacre. Beginning of that moment, I could not, as an historian, to move away from this village Tantura, knowing that probably something very, very extraordinary happened there. And you probably know that the moment an historian takes any evidence relevant to his research and put him away because of any reason like you are a Jew, it may make a kind of a damage to your holy nation and so on, that moment you stop being historian, you begin to be storytellers, or a liar, or who knows what. But this moment, you stop being an historian. And I looked after more and more Palestinians, knowing that I have to find everyone that is possible to tell me something about what happened in Tantura, Israelis and Palestinians. And from the 135 people that I interviewed for this research, 65 are those concerning Tantura, half Jews, half Palestinians. All of the theses could be different totally without those personal stories. I just give you one example of one of the documents I found in the Israeli archive of the Israeli army. There is there one order of the commander of the area of Haifa, not very far from Tantura, ordering the commander of Tantura treat fast to bury all those who died in Tantura in order to prevent high disease. And this was about almost 3 weeks after the battle. Talking about battle, it wasn't such a great battle. Tantura had only a few night guards, a few hundred meters far from the village. And the moment that the line of those guards was broken, they ran away back to the village, telling the people, it's all finished, just go out, raise hands. When I asked people how many died in Tantura from the Palestinians, I was told about 15 to 20. But one of the soldiers that I interviewed told me that after conquering the village, all of the village was taken to the seashore, and they put them men aside and women and children in the other side. And the commander of the company of that soldier was going among those men of Tantura, asking them personally, where is your rifle? The moment the one answered, I have no rifle, he was directly shot in his head. Those who said, my rifle is somewhere hidden next to my house, were taken, knotted to their houses, and the rifle went out and the one did not. The highest officer that I interviewed was a general named Shlomo Ambar. He told me at the very beginning of the interview, when I saw what my friends, Israeli soldiers, doing in Tantura cemetery, I couldn't bear it any longer and I stayed away from the place. Because he was not directly a commander of fighters at that battle, he just was responsible to get away with all kinds of obstacles that disturb people to come closer. Maybe he had, therefore, a better conscience to speak about what happened, and he didn't speak very much, but with very, very small details, it was quite too much already. When I asked him, what are you talking about the cemetery, he told me, never mind, go ahead to Jabba, Ijdim, and Razal, the other villages that I researched. And then I wanted to know, because it was the beginning of the interview, tell me what happened there. And he again refused, but a minute later he was saying between me and him something like, but you know, even the Germans did not kill military prisoners that were alive. And then I asked him, what are Germans doing here? We are talking about Tantura, Jabba, Ijdim, and Razal, and he did not react. But at those very days, I was also interviewing Palestinians that told me that in a certain minute, all of the men of Tantura were taken to the cemetery of the village, and they put them in lines, and they ordered them to begin digging. And every line that finished digging just was shot and fell down to the holes, which I guess remind at least a few of you something that had to do with Germans. 3 years after the end of the Second World War. I want you to know it's not a great pleasure for me to tell you all of this. It's a great pain until this very day, although it takes already a few good years. I'm not yet very used to what I myself found in this research. Another interview that I had was with a night guard, a Jewish living in Zichron Yaakov, very close to Tantura. He was taken by the soldiers as a guide to take the Company A to attack Tantura from the north. And he told me that after the battle, he was responsible to bury the bodies of the Palestinians in Tantura. Of course, hearing this, I immediately asked him, how many did you bury? And he told me, I counted 180, 200, 230, and stopped. He didn't say finished, stopped. 2 years later, he was asked by people who made a film about the county of that place for 50 years of independence of Israel. And of course, they had to take Tantura as something that symbolizes the heroism of that chosen nation and chosen army, pure army. And they began to take all kinds of interviews with people, but every time they came closer to Tantura, they stopped because it began to smell very bad. But in one rough piece of audio cassette that I found in one of the archives there in the area, that man answered on the same question 270 to 280, which means not 20 and not 25, much, much more. And I know from other interviews that they were killed in all kinds of forms, in the trees, behind the trees, in the seashore, everywhere. And this make a kind of explanation why 3 weeks later they received that order. Treat to bury fast as possible the bodies in order to prevent high disease, which didn't say very much, being just this order without the personal evidences. I am attacked, among other things, that how comes that I, based on personal stories, I am telling about a massacre. And it's impossible to be based on personal stories, and oral history as a whole is not to be used in researches about 48 war. My answer to this is very simple. Those who will make researches about 48, I hope it will happen once, will have to explain very carefully why, if they won't use personal stories, we are talking about what we call contemporary history. Those who will make those researches without personal stories will have to explain this, and not the opposite. I finished the thesis in March 98. I received in August or September 97 from 100, which is not very bad, and then dedicated another year to complete the seminars and to finish with all of the duties of the master. And then I was announced that I finished everything in excellent grade B, and that they are going to take this thesis to put it in a kind of a competition of the faculty for receiving prize, which I never asked, but thank you. But at the same time, the Noble University of Haifa sent a letter, a routine letter, in what we call in spread NATO to everywhere, to universities and to newspapers and so on, with lists of students who finished their masters with the subjects of the masters also, with the thesis.
As mentioned, the thesis was written in 1998. 2 years later, a journalist who browsed through the University of Haifa's library found the thesis and published its finding on the massacre in a daily newspaper called Ma'ariv.
And a friend of me who learned with me in courses with, I don't know if anyone knows, Ilan Pappe, one of the very best Palestinologists in the world. He learned courses with me, and he knew that I came back to the university. He was at the time already the manager of Ma'ariv in Haifa, the second big newspaper in Israel. And he wanted to ask me questions about the thesis, because in the last time he saw me, when he knew that I'm back in the university and asked questions, I already was working on this thesis of massacre, and I wanted less than anything else newspapers to get inside. Anyway, he was very suspicious because I answered him about all kinds of things about the weather, and people are very nice here and so on. And he was working in the intelligence in the army, and he became very suspicious. And I also didn't want to answer him when he asked me after receiving the letter. So he just went to the university and read the thesis and received what we call in Hebrew, in Arabic, harara. Harara is fever. He prepared, although I asked him not to do it yet because I wanted to prepare an article for the Journal of Palestine Studies, edited in Washington, like it is a custom in such cases. But he wanted to make his article, and he did it, and this appeared in that Ma'ariv in one of the weekends of January 2000, and many televisions from the whole world, radios, and so on, came. And 5 days later, and I was hospitalized in the Hillel Yafe Hospital in Hadera because of a brain stroke that attacked my 3 foreign languages, English, Spanish, and Arabic. And you probably can feel that I'm not very, very strong in English. It's nothing like I'm able to be proud about. Anyway, I'm telling you this because a few months later, I was asked to apologize about this thesis, and those heroes of the Alexandroni Brigade was demanding me to apologize, or if not, they are going to make a court law against me, telling that I am a liar, talking about libel and so on. At that moment, I turned to the famous University of Haifa, and then the rector, who was, by the way, a lecturer of me, with 3 courses of only 95 and 96 in the second also. And I just asked him why and if the University of Haifa, the Noble University of Haifa, does not enter to this business. And then he answered me that the university has only academical responsibility and nothing juridically. And then I asked him, just tell me if in a case I made this thesis out in the street, didn't I have supervisor from the university that by chance was also the chairman of the department, a professor, or did not 3 professors check this thesis? And besides, I just asked him personally because we were good friends until then. Don't you believe me? Do you take me like a liar suddenly because until this moment you never told me anything like this? I am not your teacher now, was the answer. I am your rector. And in order to put the very famous University of Haifa inside this subject, the judge in Tel Aviv wanted me to pay only 35,000 shekels. Just to put University of Haifa, the place that was my university once, as side C in this chapter. I also paid 17,500 shekels because I told the judge that this thesis, by chance, with all the respect to the court law, was made for the university and not for the court law, another payment. At that moment, I had to decide within less than 1 week where from I am going to take something like 55,000 shekels in order to go on with that process. And then I went with my good friend, late Faisal Husseini, the Palestinian, who was the chairman of Institution of Investigation of Palestinian History. Not like Uzi Landau, one of the very respectable ministers of our George W. Sharon, that thought that in the Orient House there was a big store of weapons. I thought that Tantura, as a Palestinian village, is very well as a example of research talking about Palestinians. He did help me, but this happened in the beginning of 2001. That's to say, 2.5 years later than I finished my thesis. Why do I tell you this? Because in the newspapers of Israel that always only tell the truth, it was written that Teddy Katz made his thesis with the money of the PLO. Not less, not more. I wouldn't say anything if it was truth, because I don't think that it is a crime. But it is a crime to lie. And this was not the truth. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that beginning to make a research that brings the voice of the Palestinians ahead out of this war that never was before, all of the establishment begin to be very straight towards the government, beginning with the university, what we call academia, going on with the court law, going on with the press, and of course, because of all of this, going on with the holy public that always say, it was written in the paper, they said it in the news, impossible that it won't be true, the whole truth. What happened was that the trial began. In the second day, I felt very bad. People didn't believe that I am able to go on with this. And my cousin, that was my first lawyer, wanted me to meet those people of Alexandroni and to find a solution. I wanted very much to think that he was carried about my healthy. But I'm sorry to tell you, my cousin, my very dear cousin, was also a high officer in the Israeli Holy Army. And he always told me that he does not want to arrive at the moment that those Palestinians that I interviewed will arrive to climb on the stage in the court law and begin telling what they do remember from this war. He said it is going to be a very sad day for all of us if this will happen. Remembering this, it was problematic for me to think that only my health was his worries. Anyway, we met those lawyers of the other side. The lawyer, the owner of the law office of 18 lawyers, said always that he voluntarily defend those heroes of Alexandroni, but he just forgot. You know, people sometimes forget. He just forgot to tell people that he is by chance married to the daughter of one of the higher commanders of those heroes of Alexandroni that conquered Tantura at that day. He took all of his 18 lawyers to check all the cassettes that I recorded. I was never told by my supervisor to record, but I was sure that it's very important to record people of 70, 75 years telling what happened then, not only massacre, everything of 50 years ago. It's important according to what I thought and think nowadays also, talking about history. Now, I was such a liar that I not only told them that I recorded everything, I didn't tell them that later on, when I finished my thesis, I just recorded Hebrew songs on those cassettes, which I could easily do. No one obligated me to record anything. But I was such a kind of a liar, I told them the cassettes are here. Not more, not less. Now, unfortunately, the tape recorder that I worked with was even older than this one, and it happened in 135 interviews, which is much more cassettes, that sometimes it happened that cassette was finished and the red light was not functioning any longer, and the noise when the cassette finishes also didn't work. So a few times it happened that it was not recorded everything, while I wrote also notes in about 180 pages. And two sentences, I'm talking about two sentences, taken every one of them from 2 hours and a half interview, two sentences did not appear in the cassettes. With these two sentences, those lawyers were dancing a whole festival in the court law, making a big show. This is an historian, and telling all of these examples of two sentences. Already then I knew that nothing serious is there, but on the other side, I also did not always remember every answer directly to say, because it was more than 3 years after I finished this thesis. Anyway, my cousin wanted to finish it. We arrived at the other lawyer, my wife and me, with my cousin at 6 o'clock in the evening, and there began a kind of negotiation, mainly between the university lawyer's wife, who was a kind of making bridges, and between us. At the beginning, I saw the same letter that they wanted me to sign months ago. And then I told them nothing to trust, to speak about. With the time, they changed it. They changed all kinds of words, but the main content did not change. Unfortunately, at 1:45, and who knows if it has to do with that brain stroke, but at 1:45, something happened and I signed this letter. 10 minutes later, when we were on our way back to my cousin's office, I told him, please let me free from this letter. I don't know what happened to my mind, but I am not there. This is not me who signed this letter, and please let me free of it. During that evening, by the way, the very honorable lawyer of the University of Haifa took my wife to the side and told her, why do you have to need all of these headaches, all of committee of investigation of all of this story? Just tell your husband to sign the letter and that's it, and go on making his doctorate. While knowing he, better than everyone else, being a lawyer, academical lawyer, that signing anything means no doctorate and no thesis also. But he wanted to make a kind of stress on my wife, who I don't blame in anything. She just wanted to go out of this business, like all the family that is suffering since then until this very day from all kinds of very unpleasant telephone calls like, where is your husband? My husband is not at home. Where did he go? Is he in Tantura with the death of the village? Why don't you join them? And when my children or my wife receive such telephone calls like this, after losing already one daughter, it's not very, very nice and not very pleasant and not very easy also. So it is true that I signed not because of my wife, but this way of influencing her just show to which grade of moral and to which grade of, let's say, academical level arrived a lawyer of the university. Afterwards, we came to the, I asked my cousin to finish with it. He didn't want. He wanted me, he said that he's going to resign if I want to finish it. I said, okay, if you want to resign, okay, but let me free of this letter. The day later, we arrived at the court law, and nothing was changed. The only letter was my letter signed, and the judge was very, very happy to inform the whole audience, everything is finished, Teddy Katz signed, and no more thesis, no more any massacre. The other lawyer, who is the better political lawyer in Israel, Avigdor Feldman, that did not come with us at that evening, and I asked my cousin and he told me he knows but he won't come, and my mistake was not to stop at midnight and tell them, wait a minute, I'm going to call him. It was my mistake not to call him, but he said to the judge, wait, Teddy does not want this letter. It didn't help, and at noontime, the judge decided that it's finished. Of course, paying another 30-something thousand shekels. Later on, we came to the Supreme Court law. The decision was the same, telling one of the judges in the court law, we don't want this show to go on. It must be finished, just like this. And it was finished for them. And later on, those people of Alexandroni, those heroes, put this letter, according to what was agreed upon, in two of the bigger newspapers in Israel, demanding me to pay it, saying this is the end of this liar, Teddy Katz, that put this bloody story about us and so on, which never appeared in any letter. But they put it there and wanted me to pay the whole money about it. I refused, of course, and then they went again to the court law and wanted the money. The judge there asked me if I am ready to make a bargain with them of half or something like this. I said it is not something of bargain, it is very principle. I am not able to make bargains about principles. And then he said, okay, so pay everything. And then I refused. They sent the police to my house. They took the car. They wanted to sell it. And if it's not enough, they will come back and take furniture and everything. And at that point, I didn't want that the family will carry on suffering all this. I took money that I had preserved in the side for my mother that is in hospital of all people, paid them just in order to stop the process. Since then, something like 2.5 years, the whole thing is going on when Avigdor Feldman came again and again to the court law and addressed again and again to deal with this subject, but for me they have all the time in the world. For Alexandroni, at that time, it was urgent. And I'm telling you all this just to show you all kinds of forms of reactions in our Israeli holy society. And exactly like nothing happened in Tantura in 48, as I tried to describe you, exactly the same nothing happened in Jenin 2002, when Jenin city and Jenin refugees, the camp refugee, was closed for 13 days and nights. Even a bird could not go out or in. And you just imagine what is possible for tractors, shufeldozer, and so on to make in just 13 days. I said before, it is a kind of gardening, new gardening, that who knows what is under the flowers exactly. Like nothing happened in Rafah, Bet Hanun, Bet Lahia, and Gaza in 2004, exactly at the same nothing that happened in that very educative, democratic exercise operation made by a state very close to here, by the very famous religious president of USA in Abu Ghraib prison. Remember, until a soldier spoke, was okay. It was very moral to make Iraq more and more democratic, like it is today. But suddenly a soldier spoke, and everything was spoiled. And suddenly, our very holy president goes out not very clean, let's say, on his way to educate more and more Syria, Iran, maybe Arab Saudi, or maybe Arab Saudi no, because Arab Saudi is already democratic, as you know. Or if it's not democratic, it's at least in the right side, so it's not very necessary. This is a kind of behavior that is causing a problem, because, for instance, in 29 of November 47, when the decision of the UN General Assembly was to divide Palestine for two states, the decision said that the majority of the population in the state, in the country at that time, the 650,000 Jews, would receive 56% of the country, while the minority of 1,300,000 Palestinians will have to receive 44%, which is a kind of a very high mathematic exercise that I am not very able to understand. Maybe the Palestinians also did not understand it, and therefore they fought against this decision, because they naively thought that being two-thirds of the population of the country, it is very simple and legitimate to establish their country there, and whoever want to get there inside, welcome. But this is not what happened. They fought. They were not very well prepared. The very chosen Jews gave you the whole universe. It is written there. It belongs to us, all of it. Nevertheless, in this very Bible, we did miss a few good lessons. Like, for instance, all men are born equal. Remember? It was not written there, all Americans are born equal, or all Jews or something. All men. And I, modestly, not understanding very much, I'm including Palestinians also in this definition. Anyway, don't lie, and don't kill, and don't steal. All kinds of don't. We missed all of these lessons. And we do kill, and do lie, and do steal everywhere. A little bit in other countries also, I know. But we are the chosen ones. We gave you. We must be the example, no? And we say that we are the example. Anyway, in that war of 67, there were other two decisions, 242 and 338, saying disengaging the West Bank. Remember? No, no one is remembering. Because we have a very good friend, the holy religious, remember who? That very state, not very far from here. Good to have good friends. But in these very days, it is very much planned that if there will happen something that I am not sure that will, but let's hope that I'm mistaken and it will be disengaged. That small piece of Katif area next to Gaza, if this will happen, the plan of those both George W's is that this will be the end of demanding anything to disengage from Israel of any part of the West Bank, which means that Sharon, in this case, will give the Palestinians, just pay attention, 42% of the 22, which means 22 is the West Bank, which means less than 10% of the whole Palestine. I don't believe that there is any normal Palestinian, and I know a few Palestinians, and they are very, very normal, believe me. I don't believe that any one of them is prepared to such an arrangement. And I'm very much afraid that this is the entrance and the invitation to another very, very cruel war of men, very desperate, men that have nothing to lose already, against those who are never mistaken, as you all say. Never, never Israel have any mistake. The whole truth in Israel's hands. Just pay attention, because it is very hard to feel that we are sitting here talking. In everywhere in the world, people look in television, while in the same time, in Palestine, in the West Bank, we, the Jews, are killing every day, stepping on the head of people, making everything possible to make them very low and feeling very bad in front of their children, making again and again more and more generations of people that hate us and don't want even to know anything of relations with us. And the moment is coming that it won't be possible not only for Israelis and Palestinians. We are making all the mistakes possible to bring the whole conflict between Palestinians and Israel to a moment that it may begin to be not a national conflict, but a religious one. At that moment, just believe me, we know about not more but not less than 1,300,000,000 Muslims in all over the world. They only will begin marching without weapons, just marching. And all of the heroes, 5.5 million heroes in Israel, won't have place even in the Mediterranean Sea. What I'm saying is that if you don't arrive to the point that every one of you takes himself as someone involved personally in this subject, nothing is going to move. But the moment you will be able to decide that every minister, every member of parliament, every senator is to be disturbed day and night with these questions. Why do you use the American money to make such big stores of weapons and ammunition that whenever they are full, there must be found a war? Because if not, more than at least 85 million Americans are involved somehow in producing all kinds of these weapons. The moment you stop doing it, you are even in a great problem, because your religious president does not remember every day what Isaiah the prophet said, to take your sword to make them plow. Remember?
Fortunately, I didn't have a lot of time during that UN meeting to speak with the representative from Gush Shalom, but in one of his speeches, he had noted that there were references in the Torah basically referring to how Israel shouldn't have been created in the way that it was, in the sense that Israel is a creation, or should be a creation given by God. I was wondering if you could tell me as to which references those are in the Torah, if you are familiar with them yourself.
If I understood you well, you want to know about the Torah saying how to make the Palestine, the land, the Holy Land, land of the Jews only. Well, you probably know that the Torah was written not by the Muslims. The Torah was written by rabbis during a few centuries. I would not expect the rabbis to say, okay, Palestine belongs to the Muslims. It's very, very sure that rabbis said that Eretz Israel belongs to Am Israel, which means nation of Israel. But this is not the point. The point is that the nation of Israel, those Jews, left Palestine 2,000 years ago, just leaving a small note. We are right now coming back. Unfortunately, Muslims came in the 7th century. They blinded, didn't find that note. Tough on them. Anyway, when Jews began to come back to that empty land, remember? That land that they looked off? They were very well welcomed by the Palestinians that lived there. No Jews were there. Everything was very nice until the beginning of the 20th century. In that case, Palestinians began to be pushed out because Jews began to buy the best pieces of land. Now, falahs that stayed there for generations, grandfathers of grandfathers of grandfathers, suddenly one day they find themselves moved out of their land, told this is not yours. How? Because the Effendi from Syria or Lebanon just sold it for money. This was the beginning of the national Palestinian movement. Now, it is very sure that the moment the Jews began to move the Palestinians away, out of Palestine, they had to begin to tell this story of this belongs to us. But the same story may be told by the Holy Americans, that they have somewhere a Torah where it's written that USA belonged to them. No one was there before, remember? USA was totally empty, remember? The same story. And this is something from once upon a time. It's very old already. Don't begin now with all of this story, because if it happens in Hadera or Netanya, any of the cities of Israel, a kind of an incident, suddenly people begin to count history from this day exactly. History begins here in this incident. Nothing before happened. This is one of the reasons why I tried very hard to show you that history does not begin at the same day. There is a basis for everything. And there is a very, very early story that people must know, that there is a beginning. Now, to say about the Torah says you are not able to speak about the Torah partially. You want the Torah? Okay, go ahead, full. What about the other parts of the Torah? They are not very important, or what? Or you forgot? Or you don't have time to make all the Torah at the same time, or what? Take the Jews, take our sons, and take our daughters. Look as they behave in the West Bank, and bring them the Torah and ask them, which is the chapter of the Torah that they are making that just in the minute. It happened to me that I came with a big truck of food, conserved food, to one of the villages that 4.5 years do not have neither work, neither food. And then suddenly, in the other side of the gate, we saw a young girl, a young woman, just put there in the side. We asked what happened to her. And two soldiers, smiling, happy, told us that two Palestinians less committing suicide. What does it mean? That this young woman came in the morning, it was noontime, came in the morning to go to a hospital to have twins, and she had them dead 3.5 hours later there in the gate. And those soldiers were dancing, and I wanted to die at that moment, because I don't want to speak about what we are doing to the Palestinians, but what are we doing to ourselves? Which kind of a chosen nation is this? You know what? I don't want to be chosen any longer. Just let me be regular. But I'm not. I'm not regular. And this is the problem. Just let me be regular. One day. I'm very far from it yet. And I need your help. Not your president help. Your help. To make everything possible. To stop sending money for all of these crimes. And these are crimes made by Jews.
The PLO's charter said they wanted to drive the Jewish people into the sea. I just don't understand why this little country of Israel can exist. And it's not Israel attacking these other people. It's Israel that's been attacked by all of these countries around it. So I just don't understand why the Jewish people can't have a homeland and exist.
Let me understand. First they came to commit suicide, and then we conquered the West Bank? This is the order? Just tell me if this is the order. Look, you know, excuse me, you know about those who commit suicide, which is crime. But I know about another type of terror, which is terror of state. You heard about terror of state? Conquering a state which does not belong to you? Little tiny, of course. For all of those millions of Jews who live in the USA, we must have a bigger country, of course. You know that not half, 3/4 of the Negev in Israel is empty. No one is living there almost. You know that half of the Galilee is empty. And still, we don't give up any meter of, for instance, the area of Nablus, which is called Shechem. 200,000 Palestinians live there. Does this must be Israel, this area? What are you going to do exactly with 200,000 Palestinians? To kill all of them? To swallow them? To send them to the sea? Or where? Just take them out of their houses. Like this. Okay, very human, very human. Like a very traditional American, very trained in this, go ahead. Very nice, very moral. I know about other systems. I know about letting people live and live also. And first, get out of that West Bank. There are 3 generations now born under this conquering. People of 38 years are having nowadays their grandsons and granddaughters, always under conquering. Now, this is Because it conquered it. Let me tell you, exactly because I want Israel, exactly because I want Israel to exist, I want to make peace with all of the Arab countries. Just remember that in 95, in the last month of Rabin's life, before people in Israel thought it's very dangerous having Rabin as prime minister because he began to think of getting back the West Bank to the Palestinians, Israel had 14 representatives of Arab states in Israel, making all kinds of activities together with Israel, because there was speaking of peace, because Rabin spoke of the possibility to disengage the West Bank, because Rabin understood that after conquering it in 67, it is already time to finish it. You know, for instance, that Germany, great Germany, that caused so many damages to the whole world. More than 50 million died because of Germany. All of Germany was conquered until the last millimeter in 45. And then suddenly we have again Germany, alive, existing, and independent. Although they made what they made. How comes? Let's say Palestinians attacked Israel, which is not correct, but okay, never mind. How long does it go? For how long? Forever? The only solution is not violence. The only solution is sit down and talk about the international decisions. Let's not talk about 44%, which is very much. Let's talk about 22%, the West Bank. This is too much also. What are we going to do with the Palestinians? To tell them what Golda Meir, made of Milwaukee, said there are no Palestinians? Or what she said later, I am very angry at the Palestinians because they caused us to kill them. I'm very angry at them. Pay attention. What is going to be the solution for the Palestinians? You want to take them to Alaska? What is the solution for them? This is the question. This is their home. Nablus, Tulkarem, Hebron, Bethlehem, Ramallah. This is their home. They have no other home. Jews have home in everywhere in the world. Whenever there is any economical break, Jews in Israel take their stick and luggage and say bye. And on the plane, they say goodbye to everyone, ciao, don't give them back 1 millimeter, and I'm going to defend on you in Florida, in California. Palestinians do not have this. We must think of their solution if we want to live any time in peace. Because talking about violence, if I am stronger now and beat you, you will cry and I will smile. But tomorrow someone stronger than me will come, and then I will cry and he will smile, and this has never, never happy end. It is necessary to sit down and talk, and it's impossible to talk about only we will have peace, but we won't let you make you independent state. It's impossible. It's also against international decisions.
Following World War II, when there was the greatest influx of Jews to Israel, the problems increased dramatically, which is not to say that the problems did not exist before. I know in the 20s and 30s there were increasing vigilante groups on both sides fighting over land. It's the Europeans and the Americans who did the Jews no favor after World War II. by providing them no place to go and resisting the very idea that there be a state of Israel, forcing Israelis, Jews, to become Israelis and fight for this land. And I'd like to suggest that it was World War II that made Jews victims, and the failure of the Europeans after World War II to let Jews return to their homes and to make a safe home for Jews that lived in Europe for centuries and centuries. This created a problem in Palestine, and I'd like to suggest that the Palestinians are victims now of what the Europeans foisted upon the Jews.
The situation nowadays, more or less, more than 60 years after the Second World War, that we, holy, chosen Israelis, until this very day, we are able to kill 100 Palestinians a day and still telling all the world we are always the eternal victims, because 60 years ago we were the victims. So nowadays, until now, we are still the victims. Now, this won't bring us to any solution. The only solution is to see what is to be done, not because of history. We must know history, but get on with thinking what is the following step. The following step is like in the Talmud tradition. They were discussing about what we have, the talit, the praying shawl. And both of them said, this is mine. The solution was to cut it. No one is going to have all of it. To cut it. This is the way to be done with this country. And the solution is there already. The decision also, just to realize this decision. It is very clear that talking about solutions must take into account both sides. Now, both sides means that this land, not other land, is going to be the land of both sides. That's to say that at least the West Bank must be the Palestinian state, not less of it. This is not only because the decision of the UN. This is also for the sake of Israel itself. If Israel wants to be, let's say, with majority of Jews, I don't want to use this word of Jewish state because I didn't hear that USA is a Christian state or something like this. Jew or Christian or Muslim is religion, is not nation. And if you want to have a state with the majority of people, Jews, okay, go ahead. But follow your system. Don't take full Muslims area. Or what are we going to do with them? What are we going to do with more than 1 million Palestinians? To move them? To kill them? Nowadays it's possible. We are already in another century. Television is everywhere. You want to be photographed while killing those thousands and thousands of Palestinians because you want to have their country, or what? What is the idea? The idea is to remain exactly as it was until the 6 Days War. Everyone in his side. We have enough land. Everyone who does not believe, please come with me, I'll show you. Hundreds, not hundreds, thousands of dunams empty. Israel government nowadays is paying very, very much money to people just in order that they'll come to live in the Negev, and Israel is prepared to give them thousands of dunams just in order that they'll come to live there. And they pay, and no one wants to come. And it's empty, just empty. But Israel, nevertheless, is speaking about the West Bank. This is what important. All of the Galilee, most of it is empty. Never mind. Israel insists having the whole West Bank. Why? Who knows? Who knows? Now, that character, to like the land more than to like the man, is unhuman. It's impossible to go on like this. Killing people for land while having a land, this is a crime. I am not prepared. You know what? I like you very much. I like my family very much. But I like myself more than everything. And I dislike seeing myself in the mirror being disgusted. Because I have no conscience to look at what my sons and my daughters are making in the West Bank. Talking about conscience. Always, Israel says that it has a very clean conscience. You know why? It never uses it. What is happening is that lately, in these very days, we heard that George W. Sharon nominated a very famous general, Dan Halutz, as the chief of staff of the Israeli army. This general was very famous last year. You know why? Because he was the commander of the Air Force that told the pilot to throw a very small bomb of more than 1 ton over one building on Gaza in order to kill Salah Shehadeh, one of the leaders of the Palestinians there, while killing also not very many, only 14 people, children, mothers, and so on. When he was asked, what do you think about it that were killed people that didn't fight against Israel, etc., he said, okay, it is correct that when a bomb of 1 ton is moving through next to me, I feel just like a wind next to me, but don't you worry. I slept very well that night. And this very moral answer toward all of Israel, youngsters, as an example for the coming generation of soldiers in Israel, he, instead of being sent immediately out of the army, he received a prize. He is going to be the next chief of staff of the Israeli army. And when I heard this, I wanted to die. Because not to speak about killing Salah Shehadeh, a leader of Palestinians. He was not a fighter. He was not someone carrying bombs or so on. Exactly like Marwan Barghouti, who is a very famous leader of Palestinians. We sat with him many, many times, speaking about peace. And he is now in prison for the whole rest of his life. And he is in prison, and the worst of the whole killers, Sharon, is out in Texas, making business with the other killer.
How many people in Israel, how many Jews would advocate for what you're calling for, a negotiated two-state solution? How many Palestinians would be in favor of what you're suggesting? And how many American Jews would be in favor of what you are suggesting?
Look, unfortunately, statistics go exactly according to who brings them, as you probably know also. Talking about the American Jews, I know that unfortunately most of them are always behind the holy government of that George W. Sharon, mainly because of one main reason. They live out of Israel. They have somehow bad feeling about it. We are not there. We must help. And this help is saying what we say, amen, on everything that Israel government says and does, no matter what it is. Now, talking about Palestinians and Jews in Israel, I didn't hear any body, Palestinian body, that is speaking of anything else but a state for the Palestinians and a state for Israel. Now we begin to hear all kinds of voices in Israel talking about one state only. But one state only means quite the following. It means a very advantage course of apartheid, inviting those of South Africa to learn how to do it better and nicer. Because nowadays already, Israel is making a very ugly apartheid with the Palestinians that live in Israel. The Israeli Palestinians, nowadays, there is something in the Israeli parliament, a suggestion to decide, to make a decision that not in all of the votes, Palestinians that live in Israel will have permission to vote. Because important questions like to disengage or not disengage the West Bank does not have anything to do with Palestinians in Israel. This is something for the sake of Israel, and they hate Israel, and therefore they are not going to be permitted to take part in this vote. This is nowadays in the Israeli parliament. I hope very much that in the last moment they will begin to think about something that look like democracy. There are Israelis who begin to say that it's impossible to disengage the West Bank, and therefore, not because of other reasons, therefore, there must be one state only. One state only, for sure, won't be Jewish state, for sure. Nowadays already, it is almost the same, the number of Palestinians and Jews in both sides of the Green Line. That's to say that from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, very soon, there will be more Palestinians than Jews. And then, what is the whole joke about? What are we speaking about? And still, we are against the right of return for Palestinians. And pay attention. I guess that except Lebanon, Israel is the only state in the world that is existing already 56 years, and still the majority of the holy Jews, the holy very chosen nation, are out of Israel. Now, what are you going to do in order to bring them inside? To force them leave USA and leave Europe and go to Israel to be the majority? I am very much afraid they won't like it very much. They very, very much love the places they stay there now. On the other side, Israel does not give up any centimeter of the West Bank. That means that, want or not, willing or not, exactly that crazy party that is leading now Israel is making with its two hands this kind of appearance. I'm not saying good or bad. I just say the appearance is going to be that very soon the majority in the Jewish country, in the Jewish state, will be Muslim. Who knows? I'm not sure that it is able to be worse than nowadays. But I'm just telling you the facts. The only way to make anything possible that the majority will stay on being Jewish is to go out of the West Bank, to go out of the other street, and the faster, better. You know what? Not because of the Palestinians, also because of the Palestinians, but first of all, because of our youngsters. I don't want them to be killed. I don't want them to be wild beasts. And I have to beg the wild beasts to forgive me, because wild beasts do not eat each other. And people in that very holy country do it every day with more and more appetite.
Katz's thesis was removed publicly from the library, a clear message to future students who would dare to challenge the Zionist narrative in a postgraduate works. We should recall that we are talking about 2001. The relative openness that the Oslo Accord brought to the academic works in Israel about the Nakba, represented by the works of the new historians who accepted major chapters in the Palestinian narrative, was long gone. After the second Intifada, the leading new historian, Benny Morris, retracted his early criticism in his seminal work, The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem, and was happy to re-adopt the Zionist narrative on the Nakba and to be re-embraced by the consensus mainstream academia. The Jewish state moved politically to the right after 2000, and so did the universities. Katz became a pariah in his own kibbutz and suffered 2 strokes, and today this once energetic person is crippled and in a wheeling chair. And as I was still a member of the faculty of the university, I did all I could to cause the university to change its attitude, a campaign that eventually cost me my job, despite being already a tenured lecturer. I was called to a special disciplinary court, and I was asked by the Ministry of Education and was targeted by the mainstream media, including the newspaper Haaretz, and the pressure grew to the point that I was unable to teach anymore and had to look for a job outside of Israel. I also published in Hebrew and English and articles based on my own research on Tantura, stating that there was a massacre in the village, but no one dared in Israel to take me to court. At the time, all the Israeli media, including the liberal Zionist paper Haaretz and the academic establishment, at best ridiculed Katz and myself, at worst called us traitors. And now, an Israeli film director, Alon Schwartz, was able to catch up in the very last moment with the very same Jewish witnesses who denied their early evidence given to Katz back in 2001, and which was the basis for the court case. In their 90s, they confessed in the film, which I hope you all will be able to see, they confessed in front of the camera that Katz told them the truth, and they recorded faithfully their versions of the events in 1948, namely their very clear and graphic evidence of the executions and the massacre inside the village. With the help of cutting-edge technology, Schwartz was also able to uncover the mass graves of the victims, precisely in the location where both Jewish and Palestinian witnesses remembered it was. It's the first time that we have evidence for mass grave in the Nakba. We know that there are about 30 mass graves of Palestinian slaughtered in the Nakba, but we don't know yet where they are. This was the first one that we found. He also succeeded in prodding the judge who was sitting in the original trial to admit that she, her name was Dvorah Pilpel, that she has never listened to the tapes. She was willing to listen in front of the camera and was horrified, you could see it in the film, and admitted that the verdict might have been very different, as probably would have been Katz's life.